Tangan has also mentioned it. I mean, Seoul has had its own domestic worries, the whole issue over the presidential's impeachment. How much has Seoul taken its eye off the ball when it comes to dealing with North Korea, dealing with its missile launches, dealing with its rhetoric that comes from Pyongyang?
Certainly, South Korea has been in political stasis basically since October, when the scandal broke, what they call Che-gate, which is what brought down the president. When there's a new South Korean president in May, after May 9, things should be a lot clearer, because then you at least have sort of formal policy direction from the top. In terms of defense and deterrence, though, a lot of that stuff is already sort of baked in. South Koreans and the Americans have been practicing and drilling together for a long time, right? So there's no sense that sort of South Korean security is actually at risk because they're lacking a head of state, a formally elected head of state. The real issue is, I think, what you're sort of pushing at, which is that are the South Koreans actually sort of diplomatically involved in this, right? If this really starts to spin out of control, can the acting president actually speak with genuine political legitimacy? And there's just never really been a situation like this before in South Korea. So nobody really knows. I would actually say no. I would actually say that this is one of the biggest problems that President Trump faces if he wants to bomb North Korea, is that he would actually want to get the South Koreans on board. And it's not clear if an acting president who never got elected, who's not particularly popular, could actually assent to that or reject it with any kind of popular legitimacy. At the very least, if the United States is going to attack North Korea, it has to wait another month.
Indeed, and Graham, the reason that, as Robert would say, they'd have to wait another month, firstly, you've got the vice president in the region already speaking to regional leaders, both in South Korea and Japan, and also there is a UN Security Council meeting at the end of April, which is to deal with North Korea. Again, elements for later on in this conversation, but can I just bring you in that the US hasn't taken its eye off Pyongyang, and it wouldn't take its eye off when the issue of nuclear or even chemical weapons is mentioned, because it's been alluding to the same sort of thing in Syria and Iran. So America, in some shape or form, has continued to focus on North Korea, and how important is it then to make sure that their military supports that, you might say, focus at this moment in time, because it has both bases in South Korea and in Japan?
Well, the focus is quite clear. It is North Korea. I mean, coming back to the strategic messaging we were talking about earlier, there's a lot to be read out of what happened with the Tomahawk salvo against the the air base in Syria. It alludes to a range of things. I mean, the focus is North Korea primarily in terms of the nuclear threat, but it's not being taken off the table yet that there are other potential risks to be had from the North Korean side of things. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe alluded to the concern over a sarin gas attack from a medium-range ballistic missile being launched and hurled over into Japan. So the attack against Syria has several messages about how the Americans are reading the situation and how they understand what North Korea might bring to bear in a military crisis that spins out of control. I mean, North Korea has at its disposal potentially nuclear weapons. It's not quite clear whether they are operational yet. We have different views on this and different factual arguments for and against that. Chemical weapons has been a concern for quite some time, and this is something that could be brought to bear. And I think nothing is being taken for granted at this stage as to what the North Koreans may possibly do over the next few days. If they feel pushed into a corner, that they have to act in some way. I mean, the Carl Vinson steaming off into the Korean Peninsula is creating pressure, and that pressure hopefully will work in a manner which is intended to, which is to get the North Koreans to move away from the brink. But, it could easily go the other way.
It's quite perhaps bizarre that we're at this particular moment in time in history when you might say the United States has a history of conflict, whether it be Afghanistan and Iraq in recent times, historically Vietnam and Korea. It knows the region well. It's learnt, hopefully, some sort of lessons from those deployments. How do you think, Robert, I know you're smiling, I mean, I wonder militarily, how do you think the United States is thinking about its deployments and its regional alliances?
Well, pardon me. Okay, the reason I was smiling is because the United States is a superpower that has the luxury of not learning. So we make the same mistakes in Iraq that we made in Vietnam. The United States American military options in the region with North Korea are really, really limited. So actually America's sort of experience with warfare, for example, since 9/11 or even in the 1990s, I just don't actually think that it really applies here terribly well. There are a lot of reasons why striking North Korea would be a catastrophe, not the least of which is that it would take a long time because the North Koreans have been tunneling since the Korean War when we bombed them very heavily. They've been tunneling ever since in preparation for another air attack, which means any airstrike on North Korea would take days, if not weeks. It would look an awful lot like a war. It would almost certainly drag the Chinese in. We don't know what the Chinese-North Korean red lines are for their alliance. If China got involved, then you're looking at a really serious shooting war. Once the airstrikes lasted more than a couple of days, the North Koreans would put human shields up around sites. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why the lessons of American conflict in the last several decades really just don't apply here. The military options are just terrible, which is why ultimately I think that, today when that NBC report was refuted and Reuters reported that, that the Trump people had come to maximal pressure as their preferred solution, I mean, that's what basically the United States has been saying since the Bush administration, which is sort of the status quo.
Well, let's just take a little pause. I just want to give our international viewers an idea of sort of the geography of what we're talking about and how far these missiles that North Korea has developed can reach. Of course, from North Korea, they can reach, obviously, Japan, much of Asia Pacific, and push themselves over to, of course, Canada, Alaska, and parts of the US. For the moment, Aina Tangan, I suppose if you're a Chinese military expert, you're looking at what North Korea has and what it's been targeting or could target through its recent missile tests would be locations possibly in South Korea or in Japan. Would that be a correct analysis?
Yes, that's correct. They don't have the capabilities at this point to push into any kind of serious target in the United States. Firing a missile at Alaska would only invite destruction with absolutely very little to gain. So from the Chinese side, they're very interested in what's going on. But in today's parade, you'll notice that they were making sure everyone knew that they had tracked vehicles. This is very important because they don't have a lot of roads. This means that they're going to have a scoot and shoot capability that will take them beyond the kind of known areas. And also, these are self-contained. They had a number of advanced rocket designs showing 3-stage ballistic missiles. These are all indications that they should be taken very seriously. But remember, the U.S. and neither the U.S. or China is willing to wait until they have a fully developed ICBM delivery system and a portable nuclear bomb that can be put on it. That is not in the cards. At some point, something has to give. China would like to see it happen at the negotiating table, 6-party talks, as I said, before things become irreversible.
Sure.
From the U.S. side, it's not clear. In the bombing in Afghanistan and also in Syria, these were actions without necessarily any kind of end game strategy involved. And this is what people are concerned about. You should also be concerned because the communications between China and the U.S. are not the way they should be. Right? At this point in time, with a State Department that is not fully manned, with new people involved, with Jared Kushner seemingly in control of the China agenda, it's very difficult to see how they have the means and methods to communicate effectively. This is why Xi Jinping, I believe, is calling directly to Donald Trump. It's the only way to know that his message is getting through.
Okay, well, let's move away slightly from military to the politics and sanctions, because Graham on Webb, I just want to bring you in here, because it's not just China that's concerned. Japan and South Korea, ASEAN countries are very concerned in your neck of the woods as well, and they have for a time been trying to communicate those concerns in some shape or form to North Korea. Malaysia hasn't got very good relations at the moment with the recent incident of Kim Jong-un's brother being killed at the international airport. How do you see the ASEAN or Asia-Pacific countries that have a vested interest dealing with North Korea or communicating their concerns to North Korea?
That's a very good question. There has been an all-round concern within the region among states here in Southeast Asia about the implications of what is going to pan out or what may pan out in Northeast Asia vis-a-vis the North Korean quagmire. We haven't seen any clear articulations of those concerns yet. I've come across chatter about it. But I think over the next few weeks, depending on how things pan out, at least in the next week with regard to Carl Vinson's presence in the peninsula, there will be some sort of, cohesive or concerted position on the stakes, so to speak, and ASEAN will clearly create some pressure through existing mechanisms with its Northeast Asian counterparts to exhaust the other levers, if you like, diplomatic and economic levers. But that remains to be seen. I'm particularly concerned about the next 1 week, and ASEAN really hasn't stepped up yet to say anything. But Yes, you're right. There are concerns. The missile ranges do cover the good swath of Southeast Asia. We have some facilities here in the region. I won't be specific about that actually provide support to the 7th Fleet. And there are clear repercussions about this support. And ASEAN has to come in very quickly to say something very clear and very firm about this, because we need to come to the negotiating table and we need to talk again.
Well, let's just bring in Anna very quickly, because when we talk about putting the squeeze on North Korea, China has done that certainly last month with refusing to accept coal shipments, which are a huge money train, you might say, for North Korea to keep their economy going, which is in line with UN sanctions. And Robert, I know you're nodding your head. I'll bring you in here as well in a moment. Let me just get the general reaction about China's dealing with sanctions and how North Korea would react if it was pushed too far. If you squeeze the North Korean economy too much, that's something that China doesn't want to see. Doesn't want to see its people desperate.
No, they don't. I mean, this idea of regime change has not worked anywhere so far in the world, and it's not going to work in North Korea. If you think simply taking out Kim Jong-un is going to solve things, I think you're decidedly wrong, and that is the Chinese view. They're trying to have this tightrope. They know that North Korea is wedded to this idea of having nuclear arms as a guarantee of its sovereignty and that it will be left alone. The best way for everything to be resolved at this point is, yes, trade, but there needs to be an understanding between the U.S., China, and the DPRK and South Korea about what the future lies. China's concerns are about the troops and the new missile deployments, especially THAAD, that are going in South Korea. The way to defuse this is to have one country or the other guarantee the sovereignty of the DPRK. That could be China, it could be the U.S.
Okay.
But if any such thing were to happen, it would have to be at least a four-party contract.
Okay, I just need to bring in Robert Kelly very briefly for a final comment, really, because if we are moving towards the scene of politics and diplomacy, we have to also look to the end of the month and the UN Security Council, how North Korea would react from any sort of adjudication against it will be very important.
Well, they will certainly will reject it, as they have in the past. I mean, if there's anything we know about North Korea, it's that they put their foot on the accelerator when they're challenged. I would be very surprised if North Korea takes any kind of, UN sanction or reprimand seriously. I would argue that a lot of this comes down, when it comes to sanction from the UN, a lot of this really comes down to whether or not China is willing to really enforce them. How much will China close the gate? Will they go after North Korean money in Chinese banks and things like that? This really, in my opinion, this really is not much of a multilateral issue. Now, this is really about whether or not China is going to pressure North Korea or not. I think that's what Trump is doing with the Moab bomb and the Carl Vinson battle group, right? All this is not really to bomb North Korea. That's just too risky. This is really to signal China, to bluff China.
Well, we shall see. Well, indeed, we shall see what happens in the coming